So you know it's not a crime to be fascinated by all things criminal. And if you do like delving into the underworld, why not join us for a special live show on March 27th at the Cork Opera House? We'll be talking about the making of a cartel and all the wild and crazy stories that happened along the way. So why not join us for this special live show? Tickets from corkpodcastfestival.ie.
So it's rare that somebody predicts their death accurately and does so in a very public way. And that's, of course, what we had with the case of Robbie Sheridan, who was murdered in his home in Ballymun. He spoke to us just before he got shot dead. We're coming back to this case, obviously, because a guy is being convicted in connection with that murder. Give us a bit of the circumstances around how this shooting occurred.
Yeah, well, Robert was shot dead on the 5th of October 2018 in his home in Ballymun, North Dublin. In the 2 weeks before he was shot dead, he'd been in contact with Sunday World. He'd spoke to us, and we were due to run a story the Sunday after he was shot on the Friday. The story was due to come out on the Sunday. Now, he didn't want to be named in that story, but he did want to say, I've been targeted, I'm going to be shot dead. He posed up for pictures with us where you didn't see his face. He held a weapon in his hand.
Yeah.
Like that. So basically what had happened was there'd been an ongoing dispute between him and a local crack cocaine dealing gang in Ballymun. Now, he said it wasn't to do with, it wasn't like a drugs feud or anything like that.
Yeah.
Like he had issues with some of these people going back years. Some of them had been kids at the time. By this stage, they'd kind of graduated. They were, teenagers, early 20s. They were dealing crack cocaine in Ballymun. And he'd been basically in a dispute with them. So there'd been a series of incidents over that summer, starting off with his car was burnt out. After that, another car, he replaced that car with the insurance, got a different car that was smashed up. After that was smashed up, it was burnt out again. And then his house was shot at. He wasn't in the house at that time. House was shot at, he was in a friend's house. That was about 2-3 weeks before he was shot dead. So after the house was shot at, when he was outside, he contacted us and, told the story of what was going on and how he felt. I think he really felt he was in a catch-22 situation. The guards had told him there's a credible threat to your life. He was given a gym form. He basically described it as a death certificate. Gym forms are the documents that Gardaí give to people who have threat on their life and they have credible intelligence that that's the case. So he kind of knew. When he was talking to us, he's like, look, they're going to kill me. People are trying to kill me. The guards want me to make a statement. They know who's behind it, but I don't want to put it on paper. So, he would have had conversations with Gardaí about it, wouldn't make a statement about it. So he felt he was in a catch-22. He thought, if I make a statement, I'm a dead man. If I don't make a statement, I'm a dead man.
Yeah.
He just didn't know where to turn on it.
And tragically did obviously end up being killed.
2 days before, 2 days before that article was due to come out, what he predicted did happen. It happened even sooner than he thought. So on that Friday night, I remember someone got in contact with me early hours of Saturday morning to say he'd been shot dead, and I just thought, Jesus Christ, he was on the money with what was happening,
And he was some people say, well, why don't you go to the police? But probably because of Robbie Sheridan's background, he was unlikely to go there because he wasn't an angel or somebody that had interacted with the police, let's put it that way.
Yeah, he said to me himself that he grew up in Ballymun in the flats, Shangan from the 1970s, grew up there. By this stage, when we were speaking to him, he was living in Poppentry. He told me he'd been addicted to drugs from the age of 12. He'd been living Ballymun all his life. In London for about 2 years, between 17 and 19, came back. The rest of the time, he was in Ballymun the whole time. He said he had been in trouble over the years, but in the 3 or 4 years before the shooting, he said he'd not been in any trouble. He'd been on drugs from the age of 12. He'd eventually gone on to methadone. He said he was off the methadone about 3 or 4 years by the time we spoke to him. And he said he hadn't been on any bother. He had been charged, he said, with about 6 incidents in that period in the run up to his death and a few years beforehand. I think he was saying that there were things like threats.
Yeah.
But he said they were all drops. None of them went ahead. So
okay. And were they all...
I think it was, some of them might have been related to this dispute.
Yeah. So, so somebody like him, whatever, if he's putting his past behind him, he's unlikely to be somebody to throw themselves at the mercy of the guards and
No, I suppose he'd find it difficult to want to actually give a statement against people. Obviously he wanted something done about it. He would have liked to see the people who were threatening him caught. Like what I forgot to even say earlier on is like, as well as obviously the cars being burnt out and the house being shot up, he had a gun pointed at his face, he said, a number of times. He had people ringing up threatening to kill him, kill people he knew. There was a lot going on in this kind of dispute at the time, so it was kind of really hot and heavy. There was there was CCTV near his house for the time of the shooting before he was killed, the one where his house was shot up and when the car was damaged. And he was saying he got onto the guards about it, but the CCTV cameras weren't working. When his house was shot up, he was kind of really upset because, like, you can see by the pictures that were in this underworld at the time, there's bullet holes in his window and bullet holes in his wall. Like, he wanted the council to fix them, and the council said, no, you have to pay for it yourself.
And of course, he does hold this dagger up in the pictures that people can see on crimeworld.com, and he said at the time about the dagger, it's the only protection I have, but it's not much use against the gun, he said. They may be idiots, but they're idiots with guns, which is, you know, a prophetic statement to say the least.
Absolutely, yeah. Like, he knew what he was talking about. You know, he knew the danger he was in. He knew, he's describing these people as idiots or whatever like that. That was his take on them. But he knew they had guns. He knew that they could kill him. They'd already opened fire in his house. They'd already pointed weapons at him. So in the run-up to this, where we were speaking to him just before he was shot, like, he told us that he even had people in the local area, other criminal figures, coming up to him knowing he was in this dispute and saying, do you want a gun?
Yeah.
We'll lend you a gun. So, you know, he saw through that and said, look, they weren't giving me a gun for the good of my health. They were giving me a gun because it suited them.
Yeah.
That I'd get involved and shoot one of the other chaps, because that other people who tried to give him the gun would have had a dispute with them as well, you know, in a whole separate way. Yeah. So they were just looking at competition and saying, sure, we could get him to do this. It's all on him then. So he said, look, he was tying between, you know, when, like, he was so frustrated when we were speaking to him, like, he'd flip-flop between, like, Jesus, sometimes I feel like actually getting a gun and just going up and blasting the head off them.
Yeah.
But then he'd roll back from that and say, look, I could never do that to someone. I don't ever want to take someone's life.
And he said it at the time, it's really wrecking my head. The guards can't do anything unless I give a statement. But if I give a statement, I'll be shot dead. It's doing my head in. I haven't been sleeping at night since it happened. I can't even sit outside the house. So these, you know, threats were serious. He knew them at the time.
Yeah.
Now, he describes the guys as idiots. And I suppose from the sort of position as a slightly elder statesman, he probably is looking at these guys as, you know, not, you know, big time serious people.
Yeah.
But that there was a lot of crack cocaine dealing in Ballymun at the time. I think it probably still goes on. And there was a lot of these young guys who were, you know, dangerous, whether they're young or not.
Absolutely, yeah. And like, one of them he was referring to, one of the main kind of instigators of this dispute was him and a chap and his brother. He said he knew, like, he started getting into a bit of row with him when he was 12. Like, so he was causing hassle, you know, just mouthing and things like that. So you know, that's what he's claiming. By this stage, he would have been about 18, 19. A lot of them would have been about that age. There was another individual he mentioned who was a convicted crack dealer. He's in his 40s. At the time, he was a businessman as well. He said he was tied into some of the attacks as well. But a lot of these would have been teenagers, you know, early 20s. And Ballymun at the time was flooded with crack cocaine. There was serious issues with, you know, there was people taking over council properties of vulnerable people.
Yeah, cuckooing, as they call it.
Cuckooing, is the term, that they use for it. So they take over the house, basically. You get a vulnerable individual. You go into their house and you basically say, we're going to use this as a crack den. There's nothing you can do about it. Keep your mouth shut. And they take it over. And there was a lot of that going on in Ballymun at the time as well. And like, even Robbie Sheridan, who himself had drug problems over the years, said the crack was destroying Ballymun at the time.
Yeah.
And said the whole area there'd been a lot of incidents around that time, even beyond the feud he would have been sucked up into. And did he, like, the very origin of it, it really amounts to just him confronting them over whatever? He said he got in a dispute years earlier.
Yeah.
And he said it had ramped up in that time. So he said it started off with people mouthing off at him. Now, there may have been even more to it than that. Yeah. I don't know. He didn't say. He just said it started with a bit of mouthing. It escalated from there. I think around the time of it, by the time we were speaking to him, he said that someone had just got out of drug treatment, and that had escalated. So there was another individual a little bit older who'd been involved in it that had got out of drug treatment. That seemed to escalate it over that summer. But yeah, Jesus, he knew full well this was spiraling completely out of control and beyond what he could deal with.
So there was obviously he was murdered at his home. Was he shot in
Yeah, at the door of his house. Yeah,
the door of his house?
There was two men called to the house, and he was shot in the head and the chest.
And there wasn't much. From memory, there wasn't many arrests straight off or anything like that. But obviously, a guy's come before the courts now. He'd initially faced a different charge, but that has now been. He's pled guilty basically to a lesser charge.
Yeah, he's pled guilty to conspiracy to murder Mr. Sheridan, Joseph Richards. So he'd be sentenced later this month. He changed his plea earlier in the year.
Yeah.
Pleaded guilty, as I say, to conspiracy and will be sentenced on February 16th for that. So he's living up in Lanesborough Square in Finglas. He has about 80 convictions, kind of offences like robbery, drugs, money laundering, production of an article, loads of road traffic stuff. He would have been, I suppose he kind of hit the headlines, as you say, a little bit before when he was given a sentence for an arson attack on a house that would have been owned by Liam Byrne. That was taken over by Cab. So this was after it was taken over by Cab.
Yeah.
I think you might remember there was an arson attack. So he pleaded in relation to it was supplying vehicles that were used.
Now, this wasn't an attack on Liam Byrne.
No. This is an attack on a house that had been taken by Cab.
Yeah, and which it wouldn't be.
Liam Byrne may have been happy to see that.
It wouldn't be the first house that's taken by Cab and then somehow
be targeted.
Somehow amazingly get subjected to a bit of vandalism, to say the least.
No.
I mean, do we know why it took so long, or because it is 6 years really, or it's even more. Sorry, it's 7 or 8 years since the murder.
Yeah, like it was like a lengthy investigation at the time. Obviously, Robbie had said to me at the time that look, the guards know the people involved in this, but they didn't have statements at the time. So it would have had to be in a very thorough investigation. It wasn't just, we can go on what we knew. So, you know yourself with these things, it can be quite complicated. He was saying himself the CCTV wasn't working outside his house. There was issues like that. You eventually kind of track a lot of these things through movement of cars and stuff like that, and you can help kind of nail down things. But yeah, it did take a long time, but they do finally have somebody up, certainly on the conspiracy charge. Yeah.
I mean, some of the quotes from Robbie Sheridan before his murder are they're like, it's a terrible position that somebody will be in, where they really feel like there's nobody to turn to. And he said he spoke about being frustrated and considering arming himself with a gun, as you said. They said, the only thing I can do now is look for someone, buy something off them and use it. I don't want to do that because I haven't been in trouble for over 10 years. That's how I'm feeling now. The only thing I can do is go out and arm myself and go hunting these people. I know who they are. The guards know who they are. To be honest with you, I feel like arming myself to the teeth and shooting every one of them. But then he says, I don't want to do it. I don't want to hold a gun. Never mind, pull the trigger. I mean, it's a harrowing position to be in for a guy like that. What was he like when you were talking to him?
He was, I suppose, up the walls.
Yeah.
He very much felt this threat was real. He was right about that.
Yeah.
He just wanted something done about it. He felt he was in that impossible position of he felt he wasn't able to go and give an official statement.
Yeah.
The guards were trying to convince him to do that.
Yeah.
He felt then, because, people aren't being arrested over certain things that happened and then not enough's been done, the guards are telling him, well, we can do something if you give a statement and say this, that and the other, or, whatever you have, whatever information you have that you can bring to us. That was his reluctance. And that's where he found himself in that kind of impossible situation. Like, he might have been better off just leaving the area temporarily.
Yeah.
But then, he was someone who said he'd been there all his life and he didn't want to leave the area.
Yeah, of course, a lot of these guys, that's all they know, and probably to have waves of family around them living in the area, But it is a thing that we see constantly for people that are suffering, maybe not even as serious death threats, but the drug intimidation, where really they should go and make a statement and the police will provide some protection, and but it's the fear of it within that community, and also the stigma, I suppose, attached to making a statement.
Yeah, you see it so much, and it could, like you say, it could be for less serious things as might not be a death threat, but people are in complete fear in certain areas of different gangs, and that's what they thrive on.
Yeah.
The guards have launched operations in the last while, particularly in Dublin, where they're specifically targeting that kind of intimidation that's going on. But it is pretty rife at the moment, and you do see the moves being made against it, because when that gets into an area and becomes ingrained in an area, it makes people think that there's a lawlessness there that won't be able to be tackled, and nothing, the state can't do anything about it, so people feel like they're on their own. So it is good to see when you see, we've seen a few of them already come before the courts where people have been charged or convicted.
Yeah, and they don't get light sentences. They get
no, because these are people who are trying to ruin lives. These are people who just want to instill fear and want to run an area essentially and be like, I'm the law of this land. I can do what I want here. There's nothing they can do about it, and it's insidious. So I think, there is a move to really tackle that at the moment.
Okay, Alan, well, we'll come back to it when the sentencing occurs, and see what is said in connection with this case. Thanks.
No bother.
If you're a crimeworld.com subscriber, you've probably already binged on our latest exclusive podcast series, The Regency 10 Years On, from the hit that changed gangland forever. This 6-part anniversary special revisits that fateful day when David Byrne was shot dead at the Northside Hotel, igniting a bloody feud between the Kinahan and Hutch gangs, one of the deadliest rivalries in Irish history. Here's a taste of the new series, exclusive to crimeworld.com subscribers. So that Friday was one of those really quiet days. I mean, we all knew that Daniel Kinahan was in Dublin for the Clash of the Clans boxing weigh in. At least we knew he was due into Dublin the next day. That Clash of the Clans bout match had been heavily advertised, but the day itself there was just little going on.
So there was very little happening that day. It's February. It's kind of a quiet enough time for news in general, and Alan Cherry and Ernie Leslie were on the road. They were at another story actually in Finglas.
What was that, do you remember?
Well, it was one of these classic sort of district court stories where a guy I think some teenagers had thrown stones at his car and he got out and slapped the teenager. Always great kind of human stories, because some people feel sorry for the teenagers and some people don't. And so Alan had been out there, but the guy had moved on. He'd called out to his house to see if he wanted to talk. He'd moved on, he wasn't there. And we discussed going to the Regency earlier. And I said, look, just go along and see what happens. Divert there. We obviously weren't expecting anything. And obviously that point of Alan being there would be the subject of conspiracy, but we'll get into that at a later point.
For sure. So it was a case really that day of, one thing hadn't worked out, so go to the next. But also there was definitely a general sense of, if we could be there, just in case.
Yes, and as you said, to see who was standing beside the Kinahans and who wasn't from that bigger organised crime group. So Alan and Ernie went out. I got a call. I think you got a call almost simultaneously, but I got a call from Alan. I'd spoken to him earlier on the day saying, see what happens. And he phoned me up and said, there's after being a shooting and I think we've got a picture. And I actually went, yeah, very funny. But of course, he stopped me and said, no, I'm serious. We're after, there's some guys come out with a gun, there's shots fired, and there's total and utter chaos. And, our first thought is, get yourself safe. I have to admit, my second thought was, I hope they did get good pictures. But, you're still thinking they have to get safe. I mean, I know you probably got a similar call because Ernie and Alan obviously were in the same Jeep.
And of course, Ernie's the guy taking the photographs,
yes.
So he's on the phone to me. So I actually had gone for a pizza for lunch and I had come back over to the office and the phone rings and it was Ernie. And I answered and he was panicked on the other end of the phone. This was real high octane stuff. And he's still trying to take photos. He's trying to tell me what's happened. He's told me he thinks he's got a good one of one of the shooters as they were running from the scene. He was trying to call up the photograph on the back of his camera.
Yeah.
Because it would have taken him a while to get it onto a screen, but he'd also sent it into the office.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So he was kind of in the middle of doing a number of things. And as I was on the phone to him from memory, the photograph came into the office and we put it up on the big screen. And it was clear to see that this wasn't just one of the shooters as he suspected, but it was two. One of them was dressed as a woman.
Which is, of course, there was also this confusing story about guards coming in with weapons, and obviously we know now that they weren't ERU guys, they were guys dressed as them. But Alan was telling me this, there was talk of these guards, and then obviously there was, the crowd fleeing from the scene. So it was all confusing. But as you said, Ernie had taken a picture of the back of his camera. People will know what the photographer's cameras look like, and they have a little digital screen. So you don't see it in great detail. But we knew this is a once-in-a-lifetime photograph has been gotten.
Yeah, as soon as it came in. And of course, look, the newsrooms aren't as busy as they used to be. They used to be very busy, buzzy places with phones ringing everywhere. And it felt like a proper newsroom that day. I remember everybody's phone was going. People were hearing little bits about it. The news was starting to break about it. And of course, we were there sitting in the office with this photo. There's that sort of news sense in you that you want to run this.
Yeah.
And at the time, we weren't putting stuff up online. This would have been held for the paper on the Sunday, and this is a Friday afternoon. We had something really special here. But we also, I think, knew the guards were going to be desperate for that picture because they were two gunmen running from a scene of a crime. So it was a very compromised situation, and there was a bit of arguments going on, and there was voices were raised.
Totally. I mean, because it is complex. I mean, normally the journalism likes to keep itself separate from the Gardaí investigations. So Garda investigations go on and journalism reports on them. But obviously then you're put in this compromising position because you have guys running out visibly with handguns in their hands. And, they're obviously then disappeared into the ether. And you have to have a discussion about what is your civic responsibility in terms of, do you help the guards? You don't want these armed gunmen to run down the street and kill another few people. So it was a complex one, and people were aware straight away that the guards are going to want these pictures and want to use it for their purposes. And we also have our purposes, which is to tell what happened and to report on the news. So there was a conflict straight away.
From my memory, as the afternoon went on and I was talking to contacts and to other people who were involved in crime journalism, etc., it became apparent that there were no guards at the weigh-in. That in actual fact, the guards didn't seem to be there at all. They were called literally by the hotel and had arrived in response to what had already gone on. Of course, David Byrne had been shot dead in the reception of the hotel. We were getting photographs in later in the day, which showed a very shocked-looking Liam Byrne standing outside the hotel, his hands in his pockets, standing beside his cousin Liam Rowe, another significant cartel member. There was no sign of Daniel Kinahan. I was getting calls from people who were telling me that these professional killers had been flown into the country and had already been flown out. There was rumours, there was spin, and also there was the general, I suppose, conversations in regards to, oh my God, what is going to happen next? I mean, all anyone knew for sure was something was going to happen. David Byrne was a very, very senior lieutenant. He was also from criminal royalty from the Byrne family. His brother-in-law is Thomas Bomber Kavanagh. His brother is Liam Byrne, and he's very much at the heart of the Kinahan cartel. We knew from the beginning that this attack had occurred as part of the rivalry between the Kinahan and Hutch factions of what was once the one organisation. And I think everybody was really trying to predict what this might lead to, but nobody could have guessed.
Nobody could have guessed. And of course, those rumours straight away went around. It was straight away focused on the Hutch gang. But at this time, if you remember, while there had been other incidents, for example, an attempted hit on Jerry Hutch in Lanzarote, those incidents weren't always public. People were straight away thinking this isn't the type of normal organised crime operation. They were looking at the weapons, saying, is there a paramilitary organisation involved here? Nobody knew fully. And of course, people what people did fear straight away was, no matter what, people knew how big and how powerful the Kinahans had become, and the likelihood of them not striking back was inevitable. That blood was going to flow.
That bit absolutely 100%. But at that very early stage, I recall contacts of mine suggesting that the Hutches were an army. Did they have the backing of the dissidents? Was this going to, were they going to be very heavily armed because of that? They had contacts in the north. It was like as if people were trying to size up how two Premiership teams were going to play against one another. That's what it felt like. You've been listening to an extract from The Regency, 10 years on from the hit that changed gangland forever. Visit crimeworld.com and subscribe to hear the full series now. And you'll also get exclusive access to our other podcast deep dives on the Dapper Don, Christy Kinahan, Thomas Bomber Kavanagh, and more.